There can be no doubt, that Enoch, Etana, it's the same figure. And once we have unpacked all these different motives associated with Etana, we also understand the figure of Enoch much better and see how a continuation from the garden story to the story of Enoch and then also eventually the deluge.
In this episode, we take a very careful look at Etana, the extra-biblical counterpart of Enoch. Welcome to our program. So, Willie, both Etana and Enoch are called the seventh in their line. Do you think that's just coincidence, or is there something symbolic going on there?
Yes, Nabai. So this is a very interesting aspect. When we read the Bible and we find these figures within the early biblical tradition in the book of Genesis, for example, we've already talked about Adam. Today we're talking about Enoch. The question is whether there is an equivalent figure that we can find in ancient Mesopotamian tradition, because we know from the biblical tradition that many of the things, the early history and tradition of Abraham, the prehistory of the Abrahamic family, came from Ur in Sumer. So what we do find is that Etana is the exact equivalent figure of the biblical Enoch. And the most basic aspect with regard to this is that Enoch was taken to heaven, as we do read in the book of Genesis. And in the same way, it was later believed that he was taken bodily to heaven, not clearly stated in Genesis. And in the same way, we also read that Etana, his name actually means he that went to God or to heaven. And we'll come back and discuss that in some detail. What is quite interesting is that Enoch was the seventh after Adam in the biblical tradition and in the genealogies that we find in the book of Genesis.
So seventh in the line from Adam.
Exactly. Now, we've already seen that there's a close correspondence between the historiography that we find in the book of Genesis in the primeval history and the historiography that we find in the Sumerian king list. It's a close correspondence, and we had a long discussion on that already, so I won't go back there. But what is quite interesting here is that with regard to Etana, in the earliest tradition, there are actually two king lists. There's an older king list that had been discovered since the first one, which is well known. And this very earliest king list actually most likely goes back to the Akkadian period. And in this king list, we do not find, for example, the deluge. It's not included. Most of the Sumerian tradition are not really included. It's only the Kish tradition, Akkadian tradition, that's included. And later on with the other Sumerian king lists, the Sumerians, Akkadians, the Kishites, the flood, we have a much better picture. It's historiography that was actually during the Erdri period, the Isin Larsa period, when they brought all these different aspects of the tradition together into one storyline. But this oldest tradition, this very old tradition, in this tradition, we find that Etana is actually included in this king list as the seventh person. So if you start from the beginning, he's the seventh one in the same way that Enoch is the seventh one. So this is a very, very old tradition. So it's not only that both are taken to heaven, it's also that they included the seventh in the genealogies. It is true, there's another list that actually include Etana as 11th in the list. But the fact that he is included 7th is extremely interesting, because 7th was, since an early period, was regarded seemingly as a very special symbol, and most likely because the 7 bright stars of Ursa Major. And so 7 was an important number, and in this regard, it means that Enoch and Etana were both regarded in the respective traditions as a very singular and unique person.
Yeah. So just to sort of recap, I think the things that stand out is the fact that they are both 7th in their line. They've both been taken up to heaven, almost in the same manner. And anything else that stands out for you?
Well, we'll proceed to the discussion. Many other things will come to the fore.
Perfect. So Willie, following up on that, why do many place Etana in a pre-flood setting? And does that actually reflect preserved memory of an earlier age, or perhaps a later attempt to anchor kingship in that primordial time?
So what we find in the biblical tradition, in the genealogy in Genesis, is that Enoch is clearly, he lived before the deluge. Now, that is not so clear from Sumerian tradition. We don't have this detailed historiography that we find in the Bible, in the primeval history, Genesis 1 to 11. We do not find exactly the same kind of outline in Sumer. We do find bits and pieces that correspond, but we do not find one outline, that state how the one followed on the other, because so many different dynasties played a role and so forth. It's much more difficult. So what we find is Etana was generally believed in ancient Mesopotamia, in Sumer, to have been the first king. At that time, the scepter of kingship was held at the throne of the Most High God. He is called An in the Sumerian tradition. An just means the Most High One. He was the Most High God. The scepter of kingship was held at his throne, and then the scepter was lowered and was given to Etana. So he was the very first king, according to his epic. And that's quite understandable, because he was from Kish. Kish was just to the north of Sumer. The Kishites were from the earliest of times Semites, exactly like the biblical Israelites, whereas the Sumerians to the south, they had different traditions, they worshipped different gods, many things were quite different from the earliest of times. And the Sumerian kind of rulership was very different. They had priestly rulers, and fertility played a very important role. The previous time we discussed the sacred marriage. That played a very important role among the Sumerians. Whereas the Semites, they were warriors. And the terminology lugal, as the Sumerians call the word for king, actually means a warrior leader. So he was the first warrior leader, the first lugal, the first one to have become king. Now, when did he live? So we have to reconstruct Sumerian tradition, trying to understand it. So when we go to the period after the deluge, so the deluge, we've already seen in archaeological terms that we connect that with the flood layer discovered by Sir Woolley at at Uruk, at other places, when the sea, the Persian Gulf, actually overflown the land. So it was a massive event, remembered in Babylonian, at first in Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, Hebrew, and other traditions. Now, what is interesting, shortly after the deluge, in the Sumerian tradition, we find that Meshkiach Kasher, it's said that he was the founder of the house of Uruk. That's important because the Uruk period is the period just after the deluge. Uruk was the most important city.
So can I...
And when Meshkiach Kasher...
Can I then basically say you can divide it into pre-flood and post-flood dynasties, and Meshkiach Kasher would be the first of the post-flood dynasty?
Absolutely. Yeah. So he came from the land of Arata in the north, which corresponds with the biblical Ararat. And we'll discuss this family in great detail in future when we focus on the post-Diluvian, post-flood period. And his son was the one that actually built the city of Uruk in Merkar, which corresponds with the biblical Kesh, which is just the shortened form of his name, Meshkiach Kasher, Kesh. And in Merkar, then, his son, according to this tradition, corresponds then with Nimrod in the biblical tradition. And we'll come back and discuss that in great detail. But what is interesting about Meshkiach Kasher is that, according to the Sumerian king list, he took the title Lugal and En. So he was king and priest. So he combined the Sumerian tradition with the Semite tradition. So he brought these two together. And we've previously discussed this aspect also in terms of, for example, the eagle, which was at first very closely associated with the Semites. But after the deluge, we found that the Sumerians, especially this house of Uruk, incorporated the eagle into their own iconography. So this is very interesting. They borrowed a lot from the Semites.
Yep.
But this tells us, in the period after the deluge, kingship was well established. This means the first one to be king would have lived before the deluge. So this is the argument why we believe that Etana lived in the time before the deluge, exactly as we find with regard to Enoch.
So it just shows that he was Etana was the first recipient of kingship as, can I say, a divine institution?
Well, exactly. In this tradition, he received it from God, from the supreme God. So this is quite interesting. He was the first king. So he was a very remarkable figure. And in Sumerian tradition, he is very important. He's one of the most important legendary kings from the earliest period. Yes.
Now, this is an interesting one that I've wanted to ask you, is how is Etana's flight with the eagle different from Enoch's ascent? One seeking the plant of birth tied to kingship and lineage, and Willie, the other receiving hidden knowledge tied to divine authority and immortality.
Yes, Levi. Your questions is sort of, like a riddle.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You want me to decipher that, it seems to me. So what we find is, in the case of Etana, he had the problem that he was not able, he didn't have an heir. He was not able to produce an heir. And he was really praying about this. And then it came to his attention that the eagle would be able to help him to find the plant of birth. So at that time, the eagle was kept captive by the snake. There was a large tree, that's the cosmic tree, and on top of the cosmic tree resided the eagle, and at the bottom, the serpent, the snake. So what happened is, at one point, it so happened that the eagle actually ate some of the small ones of the snake. Snake was very angry, and then he made a plan with the help of the god Utu, and he went and he hid himself within a carcass of a wild bull. Well, in this carcass, when the eagle came, he grabbed the eagle and he stripped him of all his feathers and he kept him in confinement. But now Etana came, freed the eagle, and the eagle took him. Then it was actually more than once, at various flights, but the text actually breaks down. But it seems that he took him to the heaven of the supreme God. Now, what is interesting is that many of these motives actually appear not in the biblical story of Enoch, but in the garden story, slightly earlier in Genesis. In this case, we also have the eagle associated with the tree, and the tree in the center of the garden seems to be a play on the axis mundi, the cosmic axis. Yes. Because at that early period, it was often regarded as a very large tree. And then what is interesting is, what about the eagle, one can ask? But we do find the eagle in the form of the cherubim. Because in the Bible, for example, in Psalms, we do read that God rides on a cherub. And the cherub, in this case, is described with large wings. Clearly, it's an eagle. So the eagles are present. And what we have is a conflict between the snake and God, and with him the cherubim. So it's the same kind of conflict. And then in this garden story, there's a reference to the seed of the woman in parallel to the seed of the serpent. And I believe that this seed of the woman is what we read about here in the story of Etana. The son of Etana, that's the line, the seed of Etana. So he couldn't have a son. But this son was he actually received this son eventually from the supreme God. It was not just a son like any other son. It was a promised son. It was very much like the son of David. Solomon wasn't only the son of David, but he was also a type of the Messiah. The son of David is often regarded in the New Testament, especially in reference to the coming Messiah. So this shows us that even outside the biblical tradition, we have this tradition about Enoch or Etana then, his son, the promised seed, and this lineage that came through the ages. So this is fascinating to find this in both traditions, but here in the Etana story, it's combined with his going to heaven, to the heaven of the supreme God.
It's interesting because the whole theme around immortality, if you look at Etana, you've got immortality through descendants. If you look at Enoch, you've got immortality that's alignment with that divine reality. And for Etana, it's his line gets preserved through a bloodline, and so it's that power where Enoch has authority, but it's derived from revealed knowledge, but it still sort of fits together like a little puzzle piece.
Yeah, so both went to the heaven of God. So in that sense, they became immortal in that sense. But the extra piece of information is this about this lineage of Etana, which is, in my view, the exact same, because the stories are so similar. If you take the garden story with the story of Etana in the same way that you connect, for example, in Sumer, the Adapa story and the Etana story, it seems to me quite clear that this is just a continuation of the very same motive that we find in the Bible.
Yeah.
The seed, the promised seed, the Messiah that will come. Yeah.
Always brings us back to the bloodlines, eh?
And in opposition to that of the serpent.
Yes.
And we'll come back to that.
So Willie, why does the eagle show up so often in all of these ancient stories as a symbol of, I want to say, power, authority, and perhaps connection to the heavens?
So in this early period, the pre-deluge period, the time before the Great Flood, the eagle was closely connected with the supreme god An. Now, An is just the exact equivalent, in my view, of the Semitic El. The El in Semitic, An in Sumerian, it means exactly the same thing, the supreme, the most high one, the most elevated one. It's like in French, it's Dieu. It's exactly the same as God in English. It's two different words for the same. So this is what I believe, how we should understand An is the supreme God. And this exact equivalent of El in the Semitic tradition that we later on find, for example, at Ugarit and also in biblical tradition in the book of Genesis. Now, what is interesting is that Anzu, that's the name given to this eagle, means he that knows heaven or he that knows God. And I believe there are good reason to believe that the eagle was at first closely linked with the supreme God, maybe the spirit of the supreme God. Later on, we find an entire family of eagles, which would be in correspondence with the cherubim. So that's a different way of defining this later traditions, a tradition about these many eagles
can I say,
playing a role. But originally, it refers to the supreme God. So this is this close relation between Etana and the supreme God. The eagle, the symbol of Etana, symbol of Kish, and the supreme God in opposition to the serpent, the snake, and that was associated with Iridium in the south of Sumer.
So you can look at the eagle as a creature that sees from the perspective of the gods.
Yeah, one can do that.
Yes. Do you think the eagle and the serpent represent more than just symbols, and maybe even two different ways of understanding knowledge or power?
So in the Etana story, we have this conflict between the eagle and the serpent. Now, on the one hand, we had the Semites, and that Etana was a Semite. He was from the city of Kish. He was the first king. On the other hand, at that same time, during that period, just slightly to the south, we had Sumer and especially the town of Eridu, which was of great importance already at that time. And it was at Eridu where this god Enki was worshipped. And he was the exact opposite figure of An, whereas An referred to the heavens and the most elevated, or one, the most high. The name Enki means Lord of the earth. He was the Lord of the Sumerians. And at Eridu, this sanctuary was built on top of what's called in Sumerian in the Sumerian language the Apsu. That's the deep underground fresh waters. And in this tradition, Enki's seed, we've discussed it already many times previously in this program. The seed fell on the ground, or in some traditions in this water, the primeval waters, and from that was born the first gods. And we have already connected that to the Nephilim. So here at Eridu was the place where the Nephilim was born or created or whatsoever via the sacred marriage. We've discussed that previously. So on the one hand, we have Etana, Enoch, Kish, the eagle. On the other hand, we have the snake. We have Eridu. We have the Nephilim. And this is what is later picked up upon in the book of Enoch. Because, nowhere in the Bible is Enoch actually linked with the Nephilim. We do not find that anywhere in the Bible. But in the book of Enoch, it's much, much later, and it's based on Babylonian tradition for the most part.
That's Enoch 1.
But here we do find, we find that these traditions were actually further developed into the ones that we now know from the book of Enoch, with Enoch on the one side, serving God, and the Nephilim, which in this case is only referred to as giants, they are on the other side, and they were the offspring of the Watchers that disobeyed God. So here we have a much more evolved tradition. But we can find in this earliest layers of tradition, this earliest strata of tradition in Sumer, we already find the basic motives.
Can you sort of just mention the Ugal again and just expand a bit on that for me?
Yeah, so we have discussed two kinds of Nephilim that can be associated with this early period. The one is the seven sages. Both names of the seven sages and the Ugal can be derived from U. U means the shining one, and it refers to these diamonds. It's actually diamonds that take form, human form. And the Ugal means the huge U. So it's this massive U that refers then to not only diamonds, but these diamonds obviously in human form being giants. So they are definitely present at Eridu in this time before the deluge.
Yeah. It's very, very interesting. So Veli, my last question is, why do these stories usually need a non-human guide? And it's sort of very prominent in a lot of these, let's say, legends and myths. I mean, if you look at eagles and angels, it's always one or the other that's necessary for someone to ascend. What do you think is the deeper meaning?
Yeah, so if the eagle refers to a spirit or the spirit of God, as I've already mentioned, then it's quite close to what we find in the Bible, where later on in the prophetic tradition, where the prophets were taken by the Spirit of God to the celestial heavens, to the divine council, to the presence of God. So I believe this is very much the same tradition that we're talking about. So the role of the eagle here is just a more crude expression, the eagle depicting this supreme spirit, the spirit of the supreme God, taking Etana to heaven, to the heaven of the supreme God. And it corresponds with the spirit in later Hebrew tradition that was also, that took the prophet to the divine council. Now, in that case, the prophet was actually his spirit that was taken. But in the case of Enoch, it seems that he as a person was also eventually taken, because there was more than one time that he went with the eagle to
But it says
heaven. And this is actually also what corresponds with the stories in the book of Enoch,
Yes.
because in that case, we find the same kind of stories regarding Enoch, yes.
And then if you look at Elijah in 2 Kings, he's taken in a whirlwind with a chariot of fire. And the angel strengthens him for the journey. Beautiful imagery. Yeah.
That's a beautiful description. Yeah. So we don't have such a description of Enoch, so we can only speculate as to how that happened.
Yes.
But there can be no doubt, that Enoch, Etana, it's the same figure. And once we have unpacked all these different motives associated with Etana, we also understand the figure of Enoch much better and see how a continuation from the garden story to the story of Enoch, and then also eventually the deluge.
And we're only getting started. Any final comment, Willie?
Yeah, we are on our way to the post-Diluvian period, time after the deluge, and we've hinted quite a bit about that, what is coming. But I'm really looking forward to take that in detail. But I believe we will first do an overall picture on the antediluvian period, the time before the deluge. What was it like? And I think this is probably what we will do next time, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, absolutely. A bit of a recap as well, and a refresher for those that have been following us. But thank you, Willie.
Yes.
So, my final comment is just what stands out isn't just the ascent stories. It's how differently they're told. The same sky, the different meaning. And the myth doesn't just preserve history, it challenges it. But I do have a final comment. If two people go to the same heaven but come back with different messages, is it truth or just the storyteller's perspective? Something for our followers to think about, and perhaps let us know what their opinion is.
Absolutely. We would love to hear from the community, as always.
Absolutely. Like and subscribe and share as well. Thank you.
Yeah, and I actually go to a lot of trouble to answer your questions. If you ask something, if you say something, I'd like to comment. So feel free. We would love to hear from the community.
Wonderful. Thank you, Willie.